Joining us live tonight is infectious diseases specialist at McMaster Children's Hospital, Dr. Martha Fulford, along with family physician Dr. Jennifer Kwan. Great to have both of you here tonight. Appreciate this. Dr. Fulford, let's start with you as the infectious diseases specialist on the panel here. How do you assess this new way of sort of reporting COVID cases in the province?
Well, that's exactly what we were aiming to do. The whole rationale point the whole reason we're vaccinating is to decrease the severity of illness. We know that the vaccines don't make COVID go away, but by vaccinating people, particularly our vulnerable adults, we essentially declaw it. It becomes a lot less of a concern. And so if all of the cases are mild community cases, it becomes a lot less relevant, and there's not really any need to shut things down because the surge to our hospitals won't happen. So we do have to not ignore cases, but the real focus now is going to be on what degree of severe illness we get and whether or not as a healthcare system we can cope with it. But it is this transition from what we call pandemic to endemic virus. And it's a change in focus. I think people have to sort of wrap their heads around the fact that the case counts will be less important than the total impact on the healthcare system.
Mm-hmm. And for Dr. Kwan, you have to wrap your head around another way of reporting these statistics. You've been doing it every day during this pandemic online. Yeah. How do you see this changing now?
Well, it's very important for us to know that, looking at the stats, that fully vaccinated people are generally protected from the most severe outcomes. So looking at hospitalizations and ICUs and even the deaths, that's usually mostly made up by unvaccinated and partially vaccinated when they're not fully protected yet. So that's why it's so important for everyone to get vaccinated if you are eligible, because as cases rise, we want to be fully protected. And for those ones around us who cannot be vaccinated, including kids under 12 or those who may be immunocompromised and have less protection.
So, Dr. Fulford, in the last, couple of weeks, we've seen Ontario's vaccination progress. I wouldn't call it stalling, but it hasn't been a sort of rapid. Not as many people have been rolling up their sleeves, it seems. But that also speaks to the fact we've had 81% vaccinated. Do you think this is just another carrot in getting people to get vaccinated to show them this is going to help you stay alive?
Well, hopefully there are people who have a lot of questions who are vaccine hesitant, and I have a lot of time for people who have questions. These are not people who are, crazy anti-vaxxers or whatever term you want to use. These are people who have questions. They're people maybe stigmatized, or people who don't have a lot of good access to the healthcare system. And so I think the more transparent we are about why we're doing this, if we actually say, look, they do work. If you can see how we're looking at this, it's true the vaccines do not make COVID go away. That was never a promise anybody made, but they have completely defanged the virus. So by becoming vaccinated, we have essentially changed this from a real serious concern to what will become an endemic circulating virus. And so hopefully as we're more and more transparent with the information and what an amazing impact the vaccines have had at preventing severe disease, then some of the people who have questions or hesitant may be more willing to come forward. And so, as I say, anybody who has got questions for the vaccines around here, we see them right away, and we'll spend as much time as we need to answer their questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dr. Kwan, I wonder about the timing of this breakdown now, because the cases are rising. We heard from Dr. Moore today saying that we shouldn't panic. He expects numbers to continue to rise. And this, over 300 is because there was a long weekend 2 weeks ago. But, the Canada Day long weekend didn't prove to create any more higher cases in the daily COVID case counts back in July. What do you make of the rising cases now?
Well, I'm watching it carefully and with concern, and that doesn't mean that we have to panic or have fear, but just be informed and continue with those things that we're so used to doing to protect ourselves. As you know, vaccines really do reduce the severity of risk, but we still have to continue masking, avoiding high-risk large gatherings, just kind of protecting ourselves and being cautious to see more information as the weeks are going by.
Dr. Kwan, do you have a sense of where these numbers could go as we get into the fall? I mean, Dr. Moore suggested we're expecting to see cases rise. Are you able to project at all where you think this may be? What sort of case numbers we could be looking at?
I'm not going to make a prediction or projection, but, looking at some other places around the world who have opened, I would say not as cautiously. For example, if places are not testing, not tracing or isolating, they're not continuing to use masks and other layers of protection, then we see the cases are really rising exponentially. And it's not just cases, also hospitalizations and deaths. So that's why, with things being open, we want to avoid another lockdown. We want to avoid school closures, of course. So we still have to be very careful on what we can do that are minimal impact, and of course, get vaccinated if you're eligible.
And from the beginning of the pandemic, it was to make sure our healthcare system isn't strained. So we want to keep people out of the ICU. We want to keep hospitalizations low. Dr. Fulford, from the numbers that we've seen so far, the first breakdown that we have, is there anything that surprised you?
No, actually, it was exactly what I expected. One thing we have to be a little bit careful about is remembering that denominators are important, so that the group of vaccinated people is much larger than the group of unvaccinated. And so some people are looking at the numbers and say, but look at how many vaccinated people are actually in hospital. But as a percentage, it's very low compared to the percentage of unvaccinated. So I look at the numbers and I actually think they're remarkably good news. This is exactly what we expected to see, which was that as we reach the 80-90% vaccination rate for our vulnerable adults, that we would in fact be in a very, very different position going into the fall. And I mean, as Dr. Moore said, it's inevitable that the numbers will go up in the fall. This is what happens with respiratory viruses. But the difference is this is no longer something that as they go up, we will not see the same surge to our hospitals. There will be some, absolutely, because COVID is here to stay, but we won't have that same overwhelming surge that we have seen. So slow and steady, but this is exactly the position we were hoping to be in.
Okay, we'll end it on that positive note. Dr. Fulford and Dr. Kwan, thanks for making time for CP24 tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.